cómo identificaron oportunidades de agregar valor en base a la información de la Quality Audit y cómo implementaron programas de gestionamiento a partir de ello. Bueno, ahora tengo, empiezo por el doctor Belk con la primera pregunta. Les pido tanto a Brad y a Keith que estén en el botón de English. ¿Okay? Bueno, la primera pregunta. Cuando identifican defectos de calidad, que sin duda provienen del sector productivo, ¿cómo se trabaja para levantarlos?
I will start the first secret to addressing quality defects is to identify that they occur. And so that's the basis for doing an audit where you're making those measurements. Once the measurement and the identification of the defect is made, then you work as an industry to figure out strategies to address that issue. So for example, in the United States in 1991, when the first audit was conducted, we identified with our audit that we had an injection site lesion. So from injections, vaccinations, we had lesions being created. Those lesions were costing the industry a huge amount of money because of the damage that they did in high value parts of the carcass. And so over time, we started measuring the rate at which those lesions occurred. At the same time, we conducted educational programs with producers to teach them why you can't give injections in the high value part of the carcass. And over time, we went from a rate of close to 40% down to less than 5% incidence rate. And so you measure, you identify, and then you figure out a strategy to fix the problem. Dr. Morgan?
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up on that is that we had tackled the feed yard industry first because a lot of those lesions that we saw were pretty fresh. But then after that, we did a project here at Colorado State, and we actually vaccinated baby calves at branding and at weaning. And come to find out, you could create a nasty injection site blemish, even at a calf when it weighed 200 pounds. And as that muscle grew with the animal, the blemish grew as well. So then we went ahead and had educational programs for cow-calf producers as well. So it's sort of a multi-forked approach to try to tackle something like an injection site blemish. The problem too with injection site blemishes, if you remember, Dr. Belk, you couldn't find very many of them in a packing plant. So what happens? They ended up at a retail store, and that's not a good place to have something like an injection site blemish show up in a piece of beef.
Tengo otra pregunta también para el doctor Belk. ¿Logran mejoras en la calidad trabajando entre sucesivas auditorías? Y sigue con otra pregunta enganchada con esto. ¿Sobre qué defectos se trabajó principalmente?
Go ahead, Dr. Belk. I don't hear the question in English. You start it.
So I missed the first question, Dr. Montosi.
¿Lograron mejoras en la calidad trabajando entre las sucesivas auditorías?
Yeah.
Y la segunda, ¿sobre qué defectos se trabajó principalmente?
So we showed you, the reports from these audits is 100 pages long. And so every time we do a new national beef quality audit, we identify new things that give us an opportunity to improve demand. And then we come together and we've now identified new problems. And so we figure out a strategy to address those problems, and then we go implement it. To give you the list this afternoon and of how many problems that we've addressed, it would be too long. One of them, though, I showed you some data from, and that was trying to improve eating quality of beef as a whole in general. And you could see that with genetic selection and marketing programs and things that we've implemented, we've been able to increase both the value and the amount of marbling that's being deposited in cattle. That in turn improves demand for beef.
And I think one other thing that we need to think about is that we don't just talk about the things that we find out in the audit that need to be improved, that are negative. It's very important to tell producers that also the things that we're doing well, the things that we're improving on. And it's just like raising a kid. If you just told them all the things they did wrong, after a while, they probably wouldn't want to talk to you. So again, it's important to tell them the good things that we're doing as well.
Tengo otra pregunta vinculada con este tema. Perdonen, pero llegaron muchas preguntas. La industria frigorífica de Estados Unidos ha medido el impacto de las mejoras observadas en las auditorías desde el punto de vista económico y productivo.
The answer is yes. So we always quantify the status of the economic situation of the cattle in each of the audits that was conducted. And then we always use the same math. So the same math that we used in 1991, we use in 2020. And the idea is that way we can measure the impact that the improvements in quality are having on the value of beef and beef products, including byproducts.
Should also mention that we're scheduled to do the next beef quality audit really and truly right now. But obviously we're not going to do it right now. We're going to try to do it hopefully towards the end of the year, next year, or late. So I think it's very important, because one of the things that we did in the initial audit, if you remember, Dr. Belk, we were starting to calculate, trying to tackle all the fat issues. You can't produce cattle that grade choice or higher with no external fat. So you've got to put some things in perspective. But Keith's right. We do have to use the same math each year to be able to compare apples to apples.
Bien. Ahora vamos a pasar a la presentación con temas relacionados a la presentación del Dr. Brad. ¿Cómo monitorean el tema ambiental y social en el software?
We measured it a couple of ways. Number one, I mentioned to you that John Butler, the beef marketing group, great partners. It was important to him to understand exactly how much money we were saving from hauling cattle only 150 miles or less. We would put a numerical value on that. The manure that we scraped from those pens and putting it onto the corn, one of the things that they were able to do after about 3 years of understanding how to do this, they were able to eliminate all of their man-made synthetic fertilizers onto the corn. So obviously that's an economic savings as well. It's hard to put a dollar value on perception, of trying to improve. But one of the things that we also did, I mentioned to you that we took customers and salespeople to the feed yards or to the packing plant. We would also take every year about 30 of the most popular food writers or food bloggers to the feed yard. A lot of them did not want to go to a Tyson plant because they had heard that that's corporate America, corporate farming. A lot of them did not want to go to a large feed yard. It was always neat to take those people there, though, because you'd get back on the bus and you got to know these people over time. Plus, the neat thing about taking them to a place like the middle of nowhere, Southwest Kansas, is their phones wouldn't work, so they had to talk to you. But what they would say is they'd be honest with you, and they'd say, I've got to be honest with you. You can feed 60,000 cattle, or you can harvest 6,000 cattle a day, and you can be large, but you can still give a damn about how animals were treated. And you just see the light bulb come on. And those people would write about that, saying, you can do both. Can be big, but still do things the right way. So that was one of the things that we tried to do, to measure that and also to explain that. Good question.
Sorry, tengo otra pregunta relacionada con esta. ¿El consumidor americano presta atención a las huellas ambientales como la de carbono? Y si no lo hace hoy, ¿lo hará en el futuro?
No. We pay very close attention to it in the United States. For many years, our industry has had a research program geared towards helping producers address sustainability and environmental footprint issues. We think they're so important at Colorado State University that we've hired a university level director of a sustainable livestock systems program we'll add 12 new faculty over the next 5 years to specifically work in that topic area and to help producers implement new technologies to address those issues. So we think they're very important.
Bien. Otra pregunta vinculado con el tema que presentó el doctor Brad. ¿Tiene experiencia en la combinación del test de ADN? En el test de ADN. Y mediciones de marmoreo para certificar carne Wagyu cattle.
To answer your question, or I'll try to answer it the best I can. One of the things we work with the company called Identigen, because that's what they did. They were 100% DNA traceable, a great partner. They each year we would challenge them. We were paying for this DNA sample. We wanted to try to glare more information out of that DNA sample. Year one, it was Angus verification. Year two, it was we could trace back cattle to pens of cattle and to feed yards and look at the percentage of those cattle that would make the Braveheart program. That's why we would be able to address to the beef marketing group, we do not want any more cattle from that particular feed yard, or we don't want any more cattle from that particular producer that feeds at that feed yard because it's just not working. And the beef marketing group like that also. They would love if we had 4,000 cattle needs, they would like to take 4,000 cattle up there and not have to take 6,000 cattle up there because that's pretty inefficient. The third year, what they did for us, Identigen, is they came up with a kind of like an eating satisfaction. not an EPD, but like a value. And for what we were doing was we were tying a lot of those shear force values to cattle, and we could trace that animal back to the feed yard. And then we would see exactly what percentage of those animals were tough at day 14 from that particular feed yard. And we would just try to add that. From a Wagyu standpoint, I'm not for sure. This program was just a Black Angus program. We are doing a lot of Wagyu projects right now, one of which is talking about developing a particular grading program for Wagyu cattle, because a lot of those cattle have so much marbling, they're off the chart with the current system that we use. So I hope that kind of answered your question.
Muchas gracias. Quedan 2 preguntas y tengo que terminar. Tengo como 6 o 7. Solamente 2 más. Esta para cualquiera de los 2. Bien. ¿Cuál es vuestra postura con respecto a la carne artificial? Y seguida con esa pregunta es, ¿piensa que realmente puede sustituir a la carne producida en forma convencional?
Dr. Morgan's making me answer the question.
Yeah.
We don't have a position on supplementary products, whether they're plant-based or cultured products. I don't think that plant-based products offer real competition to meat products for those customers that prefer meat products. I do think that cultured products in the future could present competition to the meat industry. But honestly, the fraction of production that will be generated by that methodology, in contrast to the cost of generating major levels of beef and pork, I don't see them being competitive even over the next 50 years.
The only thing I'll say on this is, number one, if they're going to sell those products into a retail store, they need to not be called meat. They need to, in many states, I think 13 states now have state laws, those particular items, it has to say plant-based meat, and it has to be the same size as the major label on the claim. Colorado being one, Oklahoma being one, Texas being one. The other thing too is if you want to call it meat, it needs to go through the same microbial testing that is required for real beef. If you want to call it beef and compete with beef, you need to have the same quality standards and safety standards that the beef industry has to, adhere to.
Desde el punto de vista legal, ¿en Estados Unidos hay alguna posición de separar un tipo de carne de la otra?
Only, what restricts that, what you call things in the United States is labeling regulations, which Dr. Morgan mentioned. And that will be the primary criteria by which consumers will be informed about what they're purchasing, is controlled regulatory labeling programs.
Ok. Bueno, la última pregunta que les voy a hacer, les prometo. Como ustedes saben, la proteína animal es atacada actualmente por varios estamentos de la sociedad y de la prensa. ¿Alguna recomendación en base a vuestra experiencia? ¿Cómo manejar este tema con respecto a la sociedad, particularmente con los tomadores y formadores de opinión?
I'll let Dr. Morgan answer this question, but I want to say one thing about it. I think it's a really good question.
Yeah. You know, I mentioned to you that one of the things that we did when I was at PFG is that we would take food writers, food influencers, food bloggers. We would have 2 of these trips a year. We would put them on a bus and we would take them for about a 3-day tour, and they would see cow-calf, they would see feed yards, they would see packing plants, those types of things. It always amazed me. A lot of those people, they'd say, I don't want to go into the packing plant. I don't want to do it. But then they'd eventually, and the packing plant was always the last stop. The reason why, each day you would gain a little more trust and confidence. You could just hear it. Their level of expertise would also go up because they'd ask more technical questions. By the time the 3rd day came around, everybody would go to the packing plant, and it always amazed me, the number, and it was men and women that would go on these trips. It always amazed me, going back to the parking lot, people would look at you and say, that's not what I was expecting. And I'd say, well, what were you expecting? They said, I was expecting to see something that looked like a rodeo. I just expected that, and that was not what I was expecting. That was very humane. And more than anything, it wasn't what they saw that they had more problems with. It was probably the smell. They would talk about the smell. And the smell was probably on the slaughter floor, and it was probably rumen contents. You know, it wasn't death. It was that was what they were smelling. And it's still today, you will get questions from these people. And they will call you or email you and say, I've got a question. So-and-so said something about this. Can you give me your opinion? Now, they may or may not use it, but at least they felt comfortable enough to call and ask you for your opinion. So that was one of the things. And realize some of these people, they would have 3 and 4 million followers on their food blog. So I think it's important that we don't just stick our head in the sand and hope that people get it, because they're not going to get it. It's important to take a progressive stance, in my opinion, and show them what we do and blow our own horn a little bit. And I thought that was a very successful program.
I think one thing that's going to benefit us, Dr. Montosi, is the pandemic. Because for the first time in a long time, when Americans went to the retail grocery store this year, there wasn't anything in the counter. And all of a sudden, I think a lot of Americans began to realize that they've been taking their food for granted. And I think that's changed their perspective on it. Year over year, we have about a 34% increase in demand for beef products at retail. And that's just an incredible number. And I think it's in part because the pandemic has kept people at home more, but it also has shifted their appreciation for the food supply chain. And I think that we should take advantage of that right now.
Bueno, le agradecemos mucho porque realmente han cubierto una cantidad de temas que son de interés para Uruguay, pero para el mundo.